Hello, and welcome to the CX Mechanic Workshop, Episode 6, Part 2. Again, I'm delighted to welcome Ian Golding back as my guest, and he has over 25 years' experience in the CX sector. Having published his book, Customer What, in 2018, he's also co-authored 2 other books and regularly contributes to global thought leadership. Ian is also the chairman of the UK and International Customer Experience Awards. So let's get back to the conversation.
Why have you done it? More and more in the last month, I've been talking about time and motion studies, because if companies actually got their people to do those again, because I did it 20 years ago, it was a very commonplace thing to do. I know for a fact the proportion of non-value add activity would be huge. And, why aren't companies doing that kind of thing?
I can see why things like privacy laws and people don't like to be micromanaged or watched. So there's a feeling of that process being, well, what are they looking for? So again, maybe communication about why it's being done and what you're actually contributing is a fear factor for some businesses, which then, it's too much hassle, we won't do it. But when I wrote for Customer Experience 2, I think I put in a quote from Genesis, which was, I like what I know and I know what I like. Yes. And, that is a problem because it creates comfort. And as you say, people get comfortable with what they're doing. They like the process and then it becomes a routine. Yeah. But you start to lose the fact that actually you're not staying relevant to the reason that process was set up in the first place and the outcome that you're delivering.
I don't think I've ever told anyone this before. I know I've never told anyone this before, but a long time ago, I'm not going to sing, I promise you, a long time ago, this is as a practitioner, I worked, so the very early stages of my career, I worked in invoice finance. And there was a particular process that I had to do once a month. And the process was ludicrous. I mean, essentially, it meant me having to manually go through about 1,000 pages of printer paper. Those old-fashioned
the dot matrix with the holes at the end. Yeah, very finance.
Checking numbers, and I did it for about 8 months every month, and for 8 months every month, it was as far as I was concerned, a complete waste of time. It took me about probably 2 days to do this task, and it was pointless, literally pointless. I thought so I didn't do it. So month 9, I thought, you know what, I'm just not going to do it. Now, obviously, this is very early stages of my career. Month 10, the internal auditors arrived from the US, just coincidentally, and they looked at month 9 and said, why hasn't this been done? And I said, well, I just think it's a waste of time. And I got hauled over the coals. I mean, I was threatened with elimination. I mean, it was awful, but what it said to me is that this sort of intuitive, I'm not going to do something just for the sake of it, has always been in me. The mistake I obviously made back then is that I should have said something to someone rather than just taking it on
rather than just acting on the
to try and do it. But I think that that sense of why am I doing this? But people will be feeling that every single day, and if we can just highlight that and get companies to think about that. And this is why I ramble a lot, because I only need one leader to hear me talking about this and think, do you know what, he's right. All right, next week, let's do a time and motion study. I think it'd be brilliant, to see how much time could be saved as a result of stripping out non-value added activity.
Yeah. And it sounds really simple, doesn't it? But it's, because you're in the motion, you're doing it, you don't always then have the capacity to think about the outcomes of what you're doing, the impact it's having on your ability to deliver in the organization. And we talk about CX as one of the oldest disciplines, and I guess as soon as there was a customer transaction, customer experience was born. But how can companies continue to evolve this? As the world around us continues to develop and gets faster and faster, clearly there's going to be a need to evolve those processes, but keeping customer front and center can sometimes be at the detriment of some of those processes being smoothed and made more
Without
efficient.
question, it is the massive challenge. And it's, for me, all about differentiation. We live in a very, very complex world now. You and I talk a lot about small businesses, micro businesses that are being created every single day, some of them intentionally to disrupt traditional industries, others not so much, but inadvertently they just dilute an industry. And what it means is that no longer can one company dominate, without any fear of anyone coming in and taking away their market share. It doesn't matter what industry we're in now. Everyone is there to be essentially challenged by others. And what that means, and it's been this way for a long time, it's not enough just to have a good product or a good service anymore, because whatever you're doing, it's very likely someone else is going to come along and do the same thing, possibly a little bit better, because when you create something, keeping it up to date is hard. So, in a few years' time, someone will come in with a newer version of what you do that's better. What that means is that the only way we're going to be able to sustain growth is not to try and sell more of the same thing, but it's to differentiate on not just the product or service. And, I do a lot still with the pharmaceutical industry, who historically invested huge sums of money in sales forces. The more reps you have, the more you sell. That was basically their model. That they used to call it reach and frequency. That was the key metric for a sales team in a pharmaceutical company. How many doctors have you met today? More doctors you meet, the more we'll sell. And it doesn't work like that anymore. And they've got to think about how can they now continue to engage with customers, but in a way that doesn't rely on thousands of people bashing down doors, but enables them to make life easier for the person that they're visiting. It's that accessibility piece. Despite what I've said, the company that continues to dominate and probably will for a long time is Amazon. But again, Amazon can't rest on their laurels. There will at some point be another retailer who comes in to the online space that is able to replicate what Amazon does, or do what Amazon does cheaper or quicker or better. And Amazon know this. They can't just say we've reached that peak, we're there. So we've got to keep evolving, keep changing, keep potentially reinventing ourselves. And if that means that we've got to totally change the way we do it today, then that's what it means. But I think, unfortunately, too many legacy businesses that they're not prepared to do that. They don't. And again, maybe it's a maturity thing, but that there is an additional challenge, which again you and I have talked about before, which is the pressure that is on legacy businesses to deliver their numbers. So, if you're trying to transform continually, but you're still being bashed over the head by the shareholders to deliver your weekly, monthly, annual numbers, it's an almost impossible dilemma, because transformation means that you might not hit your numbers and you might have to get smaller before you can get bigger. And the story that I will often share, because it's personal to me, is my retail experience of working in a very traditional catalog business that had not just catalogs, but also 200 physical department stores in the UK. But it didn't work. The company was losing money. And so the shareholders, in this case, it was privately owned, made the incredibly bold decision to say, well, if it doesn't work, we've got to do it differently. And so that organization, which was known as Shop Direct, now known as the Very Group, was probably one of the most significant business transformations ever in the UK. many people won't even know, because it's a brand that is aimed at a specific demographic. But to go from a gigantic monster from, you know, the 1980s to what it looks like today, which is a company that is huge, you know, significantly smaller. You know, it's gone from 20,000 employees to 3,000 employees and is now entirely online. But it is now one of the most profitable online retailers in the world. You know, but I started working there in 2005. It lost money until about 2015, didn't make a penny, you know, but the shareholders understood that if you're going to reinvent and you're going to make money, you've got to be prepared to potentially lose it while you're reinventing yourself. But I don't think I know shareholders are not in general prepared to go into these things for the long term. They want short-term financial return, and that prevents these transformations from happening.
Yeah, it commoditizes the process, and the KPIs are driving the behavior of the organization, which is therefore the inhibitor, isn't it? Absolutely.
Right. And so it's just a constant cycle of woe, because, well, we can't do that because we've got to keep doing that. So what do we do? You know, and then by the time they realize that, well, maybe you should reinvent, it's too late.
Yeah, and I mean, I started my career in entertainment distribution, you know, and that was physical CDs, DVDs, games, you name it. And there were a plethora of different retailers. And I worked in e-commerce as part of my initial career, and that was hard work to get the e-commerce businesses recognized by the major record labels, because they had a way of doing it. They saw the numbers that the retailers were delivering, but didn't understand the numbers, or didn't trust the numbers that were coming from e-commerce, because they were significantly bigger. Yes. For a company that was so much smaller, but because they were focused on a product or category, it made it easier for them to get that sort of numbers. Absolutely, in terms of sales. But over time, you know, we've digitized music, and the retailers have, you know, a number of them have disappeared. So Virgin Music has gone, Tower Records have folded, and
it was a huge part of why Woolworths went as well. Actually,
absolutely, and NBC went as part of that, and part of that transition. HMV, who had 400 plus stores, have now dropped to 160, but they've changed their model to become specialists.
Yes.
What were their staff there for? Well, they loved the product. They had detailed knowledge, they had genre experience, and they wanted to chat to customers about albums and artists we'd never heard of in the mainstream. Yeah. That's why they went to work for that store, and that's why it existed.
You know, I think historically, and for some, it is still the case, it's almost as though there is a belief that there is a never-ending pot of money at the end of the rainbow. You know, we just need to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But you know, is that really viable anymore? You know, that there isn't a pot of money at the end of the rainbow. You know, I think we've got to go back to not obsessing with making as much money as is humanly possible. We've got to go back to actually being just really good at what we do. And that doesn't necessarily mean you've got to be gigantic. You know, you've just got to be really good at what you do. And if you're really good at what you do, your customers will keep coming back, and you will drive incremental growth. But you know, that's good. You know, and that's what we need to be comfortable with. But I think, unfortunately, you know, the capitalist society that's developed over however many decades, that there are many that's not enough, and it will never be enough. And so in this mad dash to get as much money as possible, we will continue to see companies failing as a result.
Yeah, and it's a big difference in terms of how organizations are fared. I mean, HMV have done a good job of stopping the rot because of the change in customer base, and recovering. Okay, it's on a smaller scale, but they still exist, and that's testimony to their leadership's reaction. You mentioned Woolworths. They started putting out of town warehouses with garden furniture. They put garden furniture into the high streets, which and homewares which people didn't understand, because there were other places where they'd go to buy those product categories.
That's right.
And when you have pedestrianised high streets, which you started cropping up in the late 90s, early 2000s, people couldn't access them. So how are you going to get your garden furniture back to your car in a multi-story car park?
That's right.
They didn't consider the customer experience, and they didn't stay relevant to the customers, and that was yet another failing.
And dare I say, at that stage, no one had any comprehension of what a customer journey was. So, you know, but unfortunately, there are still too many that don't really understand what to do with a customer journey, which is why they still make decisions like that in principle seem like a good idea, but in reality, they actually don't deliver the value that the organization or the customer is looking for.
Yeah, no, it's frustrating. We're talking about it, but it's becoming clearer because there are more and more examples of organizations that are succeeding in getting it right. So that gives us the ability to then share with those that are struggling to get their heads around it, to say, look, this is what works, this is why it's worked, and to start showing how you can succeed in small changes that lead to a bigger overall change. And we often talk about organizations biting off more than they can chew and failing because they just make the projects too big, whereas smaller, more less significant, but still working towards the same North Star, as we'd call it.
Absolutely.
Is a way of starting to chip away, and over time, all of a sudden you find that you've made some massive changes. Thank you, Ian. The conversation has been fantastic. Sadly, that's all we have time for, though. And I'd like to thank the audience. Please like and share the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell icon to get notifications when the next episode is live. All the best and goodbye.